Hi, this is Andrew, and this is Keen On, the daily now.tv chat show with some of the world's leading thinkers and writers. Hello, everybody. It is July the 21st, 2023, a Friday. Yesterday, I did a show with my old friend Tom Hartman. He's America's #1 progressive talk show host and a prolific writer. He has a new book out, The Hidden History of American Democracy. And he made an interesting observation in our conversation. He suggested that research notes that animals are as democratic as we are, and that the organization of all forms of other species, from the big beasts to fish, is democracy. They all follow each other and they do what the majority of them determine. It was an interesting observation. What I should have asked him is what happens to minorities in the animal world, but that's another question. The theme of animals and what we can and can't learn from them is a very persistent theme in this show. We've done many shows, many interesting conversations on what we humans can learn from other species. One with Carl Safina on learning humility, another with Ed Yong, the prize-winning Atlantic writer, on learning empathy, and another with Jackie Higgins, a distinguished naturalist, on what we can learn about our senses. Mostly writers seems to think that what we can learn above all else is our ignorance. We did a great show with Justin Gregg that suggests that animal intelligence actually reveals human stupidity. That seems to be a meme, if you like, these days in the 2020s. And we did a show also with Laline Paul, who we talked to about language and what would other species tell us if they could talk. Perhaps we might reverse that and say, what would we say to other species if they could understand what we were saying? We actually did a show on that with Karen Backer, a Canadian scientist who believes that we're developing digital technology that will allow us to talk to the animals like digital Dr. Doolittles. My guess is that my guest today on the show, Keggie Carew, she has a new book out, Beastly, A New History of Animals and Us, might suggest that if we could talk to the animals, our first words would be sorry for all the terrible suffering we've inflicted on you. But I don't want to put words into Keggie's mouth. She's joining us from a Welsh farmhouse north of Fishguard, as I said to her earlier, just where I expected her to be. Keggie, if we could indeed talk to the animals as other species, as Karen Backer suggests we might be able to do with new technology, would the first word we articulate, the appropriate word, would it be sorry?
It might be sorry. And we would also have to say we got it very wrong, or we misled each other from a long way back. I mean, I think that our relationship started to split about 12,000 years ago. I mean, we merrily hunted in the 30,000, we hunted the mammoths out, for instance, in 30,000 years ago. But I think when our relationship really started to fracture was when we went farming and we started to sort of corral our beasts into these sort of warm living larders, which we suddenly had to protect. And then we suddenly found we had a whole load of enemies that we didn't necessarily have before, with predators from insects to, Asiatic lions. And that's when everything started to go wrong for animals, at least. And also for us, because we didn't understand their incredible ecological roles and their importance, let alone who they were or what they were. We put ourselves at the top of the tree, and we were not a branch of the evolutionary tree, we were the pinnacle. And it's had problems. We've had problems with our understanding of animals ever since. So I thought I'd better I mean, when I looked at some of the challenges that we're facing today, all roads seem to go back to our paradoxical relationship with the animal world. So I thought I better try and untangle this and write a book about it. So,
can it all go back to a certain Greek and who begins the A name Greek, Aristotle? A lot of people look back to Aristotle for wisdom, foundations of democracy and justice and ethics. But for you, Aristotle seems to represent the man who created the very tree, the illusion of humans being on top of some sort of hierarchy.
he did. I mean, the story is so fascinating because there's so many paradoxes and contradictions, because Aristotle was also possibly the first proper zoologist who really observed animals. I mean, it's astonishing, I think, to think that in 350 BC, Aristotle observed the sperm presenting arm of the octopus, right? Yet 2,000 years later, Edward Topsell, a clergyman, wrote a book called Four-Footed Beasts 2,000 years later, and categorized beasts into three categories: tame and wild, edible and inedible, useful and useless. So that's how far we got in 2,000 years. And yet Aristotle had made some extraordinary observations, but he did believe that, you know, everything was made for the purpose of man, and so that is how he arranged his great chain of being, right up to man. Women.
Is there an alternative, shall we say? I mean, Aristotle wasn't a formal Christian, but he's been used by later Christians, particularly Aquinas, to build a sort of a rational Christianity. Is there an alternative theology, if that's the right word, to Aristotle from antiquity? The Bible, for example, or some other thinkers, whether they're from classical antiquity or other civilizations?
Well, you know, this Tao philosophy had a completely different, and it was an ancient philosophy, had a very, very different idea about animals and how incredibly important they were. And they did understand how not to mess with even the little bugs in the soil, because something, you know, was going to go wrong. So they had a very different, but it didn't win out. One could maybe take on capitalism for that. We had a new religion when that came along, but for a long time there were peoples in the world that lived reasonably well with the animal world. I mean, we've always eaten, you know, we're like them. We have a kind of, we're tribal with a mindset, so we are stuck in our ways. You know, we've lived by eating animals, and some religions, but particularly the Abrahamic religions, were really, really problematic, I think, for the animal world. And
well, what about, and correct me if I'm being too vulgar here, Keggie. I mean, what about the vulgar Darwinian argument? Maybe Darwin wouldn't have made it, but some sort of vulgar Darwinians would, that life is a struggle to survive, and to survive we had to eat the animals, and it was us or them, otherwise they would have eaten us.
Well, the thing about it is that humans, we always played above our natural capacities because we used our big brains to outwit our natural abilities. So we invented tools, and it's just that the problem with tools is they got better and better and better, and we were able to play a game that just didn't fit the world of animals, where, for instance, a predator would keep the herbivores in check, and the herbivores, there was a sort of a balance, and that there was always a dynamic flux with all sorts of things connected to, you know, there was bad luck. There were some seasons where there was no food and things died out, but there was a general balance. And when we came along, we just flipped that. So things became out of balance. And with whether it was our machinery, our tools, our chemicals, we flipped those balances so far now that our ecosystems are breaking down. So, you know, humans, we just play much way above our weight.
But some people might say, when I say some people might say, it usually is a euphemism for me saying, well, I would say that when you say play above our weight, nobody else invented tools. No other species really has the technology we have, from wheels to weapons to AI. So why are we playing above our weight? Is that some sort of, that a reflection of your conception of the natural order?
Well, I'm not saying that we're doing it for a reason. I mean, we just are. I mean, we're just very, very clever. We're just very, very clever.
That's the big brains, right?
Sorry?
Clever. That's our brains, our big brains, you said.
Yeah, we've got our big brains. But it's coming back to bite us because we haven't been that clever. So we're so clever about what we've been able to do and make our life very, very comfortable. And we've gone explored it. You know, we've done so much. What an extraordinary animal we are. But what's happening now is we're destroying the planet that we need to survive. And what we haven't understood is, and this is the thing I think about Beasley, the most important thing is what we haven't understood is how important animals are, and what we need to do to restore the planetary system, the life support systems that we need to survive. But also we haven't really understood, there's a thing called Umwelt, which was a very interesting Austrian called Jakob von Uexküll came up with this idea of looking at animals, not whether who's the cleverest, who's the fastest, who's the you know, strongest, who's the best predator, but more looking at each animal within their own unique sensory world. Because everything, I mean, the great Alexander von Humboldt was one of the first people that really understood how everything was interrelated, interconnected to everything else. And so as clever as we are, as clever as and as brilliant engineers as we are, and we're not as good as beavers, as hydrologists of the land. We're not. They're much better at it than we are. And we have just not realized that we're in this very, very fine dynamic system, and that we're related, and all species need other species. So if we continue to wipe all these species out, we're going to be in deep trouble. And particularly with insects, the invertebrate world, if we continue sloshing the chemicals around at the rate that we are, we lose our soil. Without our soil, we don't have anything. But the problem is even though we know this, we're not responding to that knowledge. And that's a real problem.
You had an interesting piece, I think, in association with Beasley, taken from it in Time magazine. Animals can save us if we let them. That's the argument in the book. Do you think they'd want to save us, or is that the wrong question to ask?
I'm sure they wouldn't want to save us. I'm sure they wouldn't want to save us, but we are all interrelated. And, you know, I think that we definitely need them, and they need each other, and all species need other species. So without insects to pollinate, without herbivores to defecate and fertilize and scatter seed and aerate the soil, and without predators to keep them in check, and without all the myriad of different species in between, these things start breaking down. And, you know, mussels, I think they're one of the most endangered species in America. I think they filter the river systems and the waters and this, you know, so to lose, and they do an incredible job of it. And it's just that we've pushed everything to beyond its own capacity to function, and we're seeing the results of it now. You know, all the wildfires, the pandemics, starvation, well, the areas of deforestation, and so we're seeing all these, you know, huge these challenges to our world. Then if we understood the animal world better, or if we had understood the animal world better, then so many of these challenges would not been there in the first place, because we would have first of all protected their habitat for them to live in with the things that they need, space, like us, mate partners to mate with, the genetic diversity, you know, food, shelter. So if we learned to share a bit better, we wouldn't be in the state that we're in, especially in the sea. If you think about the sea,
yeah, we've done
yeah,
a number of shows on the sea pollution.
Yeah, we've just taken.
Your book is, you call it A New History of Animals and Our Species. There are some narratives being put forward, and we've had people on the show suggesting that there's a huge difference between how we modern industrialized Western types and native societies view animals and nature. Do you buy that? Or are native societies, Native Americans, for example, ultimately, are they as responsible, may not have quite our technology, but they were also in the business of wiping out animals when they could? They
did wipe out animals. You know, we can't deny that. When the Maoris landed in New Zealand, there were a lot of species that disappeared quite quickly. Wherever we go, I think, you know.
Yeah, I mean, you got this rather dark quote: "Wherever we showed up, dark extinctions followed." So we humans, we're responsible for extinctions, whether we're the Maoris or the Americans.
We can be. I mean, I think that there's some native peoples who really have lived very, very well or sustainably. I mean, that's a difficult word too, because people misuse it now. But I think that there have been societies that have lived very, very well. They haven't been, you know, they've been small societies, small populations. I think we've got huge populations now. It's much more difficult. And as you say, our technologies, you know, things aren't going to escape us these days.
Technology, Keggie, is it always the problem? I mean, as I said, Karen Backer believes that we now have technology that will allow us to talk to other species, that will sort of make us feel as if they're part of our family. The technologies are now that allow us to create meat without killing other animals. There are technologies that allow us to create clothing without killing animals. Can technology help us in all this now?
Definitely, it can help us. The technology, a lot of it is proto-technology, and it's not really there. Like, the ideas are there, and, you know, the meat that's not really there yet. It's going to be very expensive, and there's going to be huge problems about who's going to own this technology, and then what's going to happen with that. So there are all sorts of unintended consequences with other technology that we don't necessarily.
Yeah, we did a show earlier this week also on synthetic biology, and my guest on the show, Ted Anton, believes that it can address all the issues, but as I said to him, we never quite know the unintended consequence of new technology.
No, and also the other thing that I feel is that these things don't do it at scale. Animals do it at scale. You know, like a whale defecates 50 tons of iron. That's just one whale, and into the top layer of the ocean, and fertilizes the phytoplankton, which feeds all the other whole marine environment. And that also takes away half our carbon dioxide and gives us half our oxygen. So that's in a massive, massive scale. So many of animals have been doing it for millennia. And there's a lot of hubris to think that we can come along and invent something that's going to be as good as what they have been doing. Or even, why are we replacing these systems? Why are we reinventing the whale? You know, why are we, if things are not broken yet, why on earth are we not making these things, restoring those habitats and spaces where those things can happen, and help the whole planetary health? I mean,
so is that really the core argument in Beastly, that and you summarize it in your timepiece, saving the wolves, saving the whooping cranes, restoring the great kelp forests? rather than inventing new technology, we need to become saviors of stuff that we've wiped out or are on the brink of wiping out?
I don't think it's either or. I think it's both. But I really, really think we have to recognize the value and the intrinsic value of the animal world, that because they are the maintenance crew. They maintain this blue and green planet that we live on. And yes, we do need technology. We're not going to go back to the caves. We're going to need all sorts of brilliant, humans are brilliant cooperators. They're also huge competitors, but they're brilliant cooperators when they need to. And there is a lot of stuff in the pipeline that is going to be really, really helpful. And it's already being helpful, I'm sure. But the frustrating thing for me is how often animals get left out of this discussion, or they get tacked on in one word, biodiversity. And nobody really can get a proper picture about biodiversity. The person on the street just thinks it's just such an abstract word. It doesn't represent the biological diversity, which is better, but it's very hard to imagine what that really means. It is all of life, everything in the soil, the billions of animals in the soil, the billions of microbes, everything interacting with everything else. And that is what produces the food that we eat, the clean water, the oxygen we breathe. And I'm not sure, I think technology is going to help humanity live and survive. However, it's the wild world that maintains, the planetary health. And we would be wise to really understand that. And if we understood it, we would understand why we needed to save it. It wouldn't be such a thing that would have to be sold in all the time, because we would just naturally understand that this is a very, very important thing. And that is probably where native peoples in different parts of the world did understand better than we understand, because we have become quite separated now from, many of us have become very separated from our natural world.
Keggie, often when we look back at history, we shake our heads and think to ourselves, how could those people have allowed that? When we think of the history of slavery, for example, or feudalism, or of putting men above women and women not having any rights, do you think in 100 or 200 years we might look back at the 20th or 21st century and shake our heads when we think of chicken farms or other industrial ways of treating and killing other creatures?
Yeah, I do actually. I mean, E.O. Wilson, the great E.O. Wilson, the late great, he thought that it would be the thing that in the future, that it would be the thing that would be most difficult to forgive was the loss of diversity, of genetic and species diversity, through the destruction of their habitats. So he thought to lose. I mean, if you think about it, it took 3.8 billion years to build a rhino. There's two northern white rhinos left. They're both female. They're big animals to lose when we know so much. We know so much about our science now does tell us an awful lot about how things live, what importance they are. It's an extraordinary thing to lose. So to be in a situation where so many things are not viable anymore. They don't have enough shelters, food, space.
What do you make of the Jurassic Park?
You mean de-extinction?
Yeah. I mean, is that really even more terrifying?
I think that's terrifying. And what a waste of money, and how awful for the poor mammoths or whoever it is going to have to come back to a world that just hasn't got room for them. It's hard enough for the creatures that we have, but on the fabulously exciting side, there are some fantastic projects across the world that are restoring nature in these huge tracts and even small tracts. If we start connecting, it's amazingly fast how nature is able to restore itself, how quickly invertebrate life can come back if we give it a chance. And if we have to be careful for our own health as well. I mean, there is more insecticide in human breast milk than in cow's milk. That's pretty scary. You know, we need to look after our own health as much as the planet's health, and we have to find new paradigm of how we live with the animal world.
We've had Isabel Tree on the show. She's, of course, one of the pioneers of the rewilding movement. You live in the countryside in England too, like Tree. Are you a supporter of this idea of rewilding?
Yes, definitely. Yes, and it's had a, you know, I mean, people are a bit scared of it in some, you know, rewilding is going to have wolves running around the street. It's not like that. It's actually what it is. It's a really brilliant ecological reboot to restore nature using animals that know how to do it really, really well. So it is bringing, helping with flood defenses, helping with restore the soil, helping with pollution, helping all sorts of things, and it filters out. And it's usually it's not taking good agricultural away from crops or land for food production. It's usually marginal land, and I think it's a brilliant thing. And they've done some wonderful work at NEP. And it's spreading out, but it is sometimes misunderstood as being this sort of, you know, threat to agriculture, and it's going to be overrun with wolves.
But books have an important role too. Your new book, Beastly, A New History of Animals and Us, is an important contribution to the literature. You're enormously well read. You have a selected bibliography of 6 pages of single-spaced books. You mentioned E.O. Wilson. In addition to yours, could you suggest a couple of other books as introductions to people on what we humans have done?
Well, I think that you've got to read Andrea Wolf's The Invention of Nature. And that is just a brilliant book about Alexander von Humboldt, who understood the interrelations and the community of animals. So it's really brilliantly, he was a brilliant describer of his extraordinary travels through South America. So it's a fantastic book. There's Helen Scales, The Brilliant Abyss, which is about the marine world and the threats, the threats of mining to come. And she's a brilliant scientist and a brilliant writer. Gaia Vince has come out with a book called Nomad Century about how climate change is going to completely reshape this world, and how what's going to happen with the vast migration that's going to inevitably have to happen. There's Dave Goulson's Silent Earth, which is all about insect apocalypse, really. But it's all fascinating stuff. And then there's just some of the old books, some of the old, you know, like, I think as far as understanding, there's Peter Godfrey Smith wrote a book called Other Minds, The Octopus and the Evolution of Intelligent Life. And then there's, of course, Frans de Waal, who wrote Are We Smart Enough to Know How Smart Animals Are? That's brilliantly fascinating and incredibly easy, good read. So there's a few.
There's a few. Finally, Keggie, I wonder whether it's any coincidence that we seem to be discovering what you're arguing in Beastly at the same time as we ourselves are discovering potentially a new master, artificial intelligence, AI, which some people believe is going to, quote unquote, enslave us, I guess, turn us into beasts or have the same experience as other beasts. Is there any coincidence, do you think, to the fact that we're beginning to regret what we've done to nature at the very time where we human beings, our perch on the top of Aristotle's tree is being questioned? That tree is being shaken by smart machines.
What you mean? We're going to be usurped by it? Yeah, well, that's a kind of beautiful. It's like fiction, isn't it? It's a beautiful.
Well, it would be an appropriately Greek ending to our narrative.
Yeah, no, beautiful storyline. I mean, I'm not sure about this, about AI taking over the world, because I can't see why we can't just pull out the plug. But maybe I really don't quite understand. I'm for some reason, not totally terrified by AI like a lot of people are, but that might just be because I'm so completely driven to try and communicate how important animals are, that I feel that is, for me, the biggest story in town at the moment, is to get, and it's not just, it's really to get that out of the echo chamber, because, you know, it's the person on the street. If we're not behind, if we don't understand these things, we're not going to want to change how we live. So, you know, we do eat too much meat. I'm not a vegetarian, but I eat an awful lot less meat, and I know where it comes from now, and I pay a lot more for it, but I pay about the same because I eat so much less of it. And those are things that we, as a, you know, the first world anyway, is certainly going to have to do if we're going to save some of the habitat that we need to save and stop this huge juggernaut, this human juggernaut, you know, eventually wiping us out. I'm sure we will stop it, but when, I don't know. You know, we're not doing enough by any means. And we do have this incredible maintenance crew out there that when we provide the space for them, they do extraordinary jobs. I mean, the aerial views of the burnt out across the Northern America, the terrible fires, there's these emerald green ribbons, and that's the work of beavers. The part of the land that's saved is because there's beavers there, creating this extraordinary, returning the land to a sponge, which is what it should be in those places. So, you know, we could learn a lot from animals, and we need to be maybe students of nature rather than stewards of nature. I don't know.